So being able to live my life outside what society tells me to be, what my parents tell me to be, what my teachers told me to do, and really discover the light inside of me and bringing that to the world. So that's really the principle that I like to share about. So a little bit about my story. So yes, my name is Rugare Gomo. I'm from Zimbabwe. I love saying my name. I couldn't say my name till I was 5 years old, so I better say my name.
There are many stories out there of strength, resilience, and courage, and we're on a mission to bring them all to you. Welcome to Empowered Voices Amplified, a podcast brought to you by Skilled Migrant Professionals magazine.
Our guest today is Rugare Gomo, and if you are Zimbabwean, you will pick that it's a Zimbabwean name. So fellow country person, he founded the Gomo Foundation, providing scholarships for girls in rural Zimbabwe, and later transferred the program to Action on Poverty. His entrepreneurial journey included near bankruptcy and homelessness, but eventually started his own law firm. Realizing that being a lawyer limited his potential, he transitioned to becoming a high performance life and business coach. And this is so impressive. I have so many questions, but not yet. We're getting there. So join us as we explore his inspiring journey of resilience, courage, and living authentically. Rugare, thank you so much for joining us on Empowered Voices Amplified. How are you?
I am well. Thank you, Ed Magnus and Sandra, for having me. I'm just thrilled to be with you both today. We've already started by having lots of laughs, so this is going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, I'm pumped too. And you and I have spoken, Sandra and I know a bit about your story, but to our audience, to our listeners who don't know who you are and what you do, could you tell us a little bit about your story?
Absolutely, and I want to start like at the end because you said something really powerful. You said I started my own law firm and realized that that was limiting my full potential. And for most people listening, they'll be like, "What are you talking about?" So, I think my story really is about being able to forge my own path. So being able to live my life outside what society tells me to be, what my parents tell me to be, what my teachers told me to do, and really discover the light inside of me and bringing that to the world. So that's really the principle that I like to share about. So a little bit about my story. So yes, my name is Rugare Gomo. I'm from Zimbabwe. I love saying my name. I couldn't say my name till I was 5 years old, so I better say my name. And so I grew up in a family that you could say my mom and dad were social workers. And so my mom was a nurse by profession, and my dad worked for a Christian organization called Scripture Union. So their work had our home being a melting pot of people from all walks of life. My mom was one of the first women to do HIV/AIDS education in Zimbabwe in the early 90s. And of course, during that horrible time, 1 in 4 adult Zimbabweans were HIV positive, and all the funerals we were attending, it was awful. But seeing my mom, a woman, go into the community, go into the shanty towns, go to the mining compounds, meeting the sex workers and talking about safe sex in a male-dominated society was completely inspiring for me, And to see my mom and my dad welcome people in the home, the person who discovered that they were HIV positive, where there was lots of stigma. The street kids came into our home. The fighting couples came into our home. The person who was divorced came into our home. And I know we talk about divorce as if it's normal, in Australia, but in Zimbabwe, the shame. So just to
Walk
give
of
some
shame.
context there, the shame. So what I saw my mom and dad doing was being inclusive before the word diversity and inclusivity was fashionable in today's age. So, another way said is what I saw was love. So in my home, I was taught love. So fast forward, I was raised reading lots of books. and would have people from different countries come to volunteer, people from Australia, the UK, the US. And I said to myself, one day I would like to go overseas. That's what I dreamt of. I wanted to be able to pursue opportunities like the stories I read in the books. So for me, books opened up a world beyond the life I had, beyond the life I could see. So that was the power of books, and I'm still a very big avid reader. And so when I was 14 years old, I made the decision. I want to go overseas. I tried to discover what opportunities there were. At first, I thought the UK, Zimbabwe having close ties. Everybody wants to go to the UK. That was the dream. If you're leaving
It's the UK
Zimbabwe,
or
it's
it's
Zimbabwe.
nothing.
Yeah, exactly. It's like UK or don't bother. But because we had Australians come over to Zimbabwe, we just loved the Australians. They were so free, so open, so curious. So one of these people who came was Andrew Gaskell, and I've known him since I was 5 years old. So when I was 15, I wrote a letter to him asking if I could come to Australia. I did not tell my mom and my dad because I was scared that they could potentially get in my way. After all, I was a child. I'm a teenage person, and in Zimbabwe, you do what the adults tell you to do. So instead of forging my own path, I really was like, I can't have anybody be in my way, so I just got to do what I've got to do. And so I wrote this letter and I didn't hear anything. And I thought, oh no, I'm going to be in big trouble. I've done something really bad and wrong. What if Andrew goes to my mom and my dad and tell them what I've done? So 1 month goes by, nothing, just silence. 2 months go by, silence. And then one day, my dad comes home and says, what's this about you going to Australia? And then I gave him my best smile and I said, yeah, I wrote a letter to Uncle Andrew. And he said, well, Uncle Andrew has responded. And he says, why not? And I still remember that day as if it was yesterday, the joy of somebody saying, yes, you can come. That was the beginning of the journey, because then there were so many obstacles. One of the obstacles was I was born stateless. So I didn't even have a passport or even a Zimbabwean birth certificate. That's number one. The other obstacle, we had no money, for my mom and dad being social workers. That could be 10 years of savings to get there, and so all these obstacles were there. So then the journey became about dealing with every obstacle as it came along. And as a 15-year-old, we just think this is just normal life. I'm not thinking like these are obstacles. It's like, this is what you've got to do to make it happen, because that's the opportunity. It was like the opportunities are there in Australia. And so I've just got to take the next action and the next action and the next action. But what I am so grateful for is Uncle Andrew, just a typical, ordinary Australian, not a millionaire, running his own small business. He said yes, and then used his time sharing my story. And the school gave me a part scholarship to go to complete my year 11 and year 12. He paid for my school fees. He arranged for my air tickets. He vouched for me with the Australian embassy to be my guardian. And that has forever changed my life.
It takes one.
It just takes one. It takes just one person to open a door. Then you take all the opportunities that door open, then the next, then the next. Sometimes, we're always looking for the multiple doors. It just takes one door to change the course of your life. I'll pause there.
Can I understand? You said you were born stateless?
Yes, surprise. So dad was in the UK when I was born. So then he said, Mom must come to the UK, otherwise they'll have a different cultural experience, and that could lead to divorce and separation. So my mom was 8 months pregnant. So I was born in the UK, but because the British had changed the laws, you do not acquire British citizenship at birth. This is in 1984. So I was deemed a non-citizen. And so when my family returned to Zimbabwe, I was only 1 year, 8 months. In my mom's passport, it was declared I'm also not a citizen of Zimbabwe. So my mom and my dad, with whatever limited education they'd had, just lived like I'm not a citizen of Zimbabwe. because it's in the passport. It's stamped in my passport.
Countries, man.
One of the things is I know I was born free, but again, it was the world telling me who I could be, and the world told me I did not belong. I did not belong in the UK, the country of my birth. I did not belong in Zimbabwe, the country of my ancestry. So my story starts off with I don't belong.
Or you can belong everywhere. I guess that's the one.
That
This is why
is
I have
where
you in
I
my
started
life,
reclaiming
Sandra.
my power. I love that. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
that is when I was like in the journey, of course. As a child, you don't think like that. I belong everywhere. The messages I'm receiving is I don't belong. You don't belong here. You don't belong in that space. And then, of course, mom and dad raise us speaking English as our first language, and I go to school. And I think this is what I really thought. I know, exactly. I thought,
I'm seeing something.
Not in Zimbabwe.
not in Zimbabwe. So, but
Not
my
in Zimbabwe.
worldview was like, oh, yeah, some people are born overseas, some people are born in Zimbabwe. So when I went to school, I expected that maybe a quarter of the people at school were born what? Overseas. And I just expected people to speak English because that was what was happening in my home. We're speaking English. My relatives would come, they'd speak Shona with each other, would speak English together. I go to grade 1. I'm like, I don't belong. Nobody speaks English. I think only 3 of us. And then I'm the black kid who's speaking English, but I am Zimbabwean. What are the kids meant to think about that? So of course that's when the bullying starts. Oh, you think you're better than us? You think you're more special than us? Da 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 da. The works. So that was the context.
Sandra, I'll give you I can see Sandra's face right now. So in Zimbabwe, there's like really great pride in our language, like our native language. And when I went to school, so my experience is a little bit different, Rugare. When I went to school, we had a white headmistress. I'll never forget her. Mrs. Drish was one of the loveliest people that I've ever met. And we were encouraged to speak all 3 languages, Shona, English, Ndebele. And that was very confusing for some of us who could only speak English and Shona and wish to learn a little bit of Ndebele. So at times I think it depended on who was either the headmaster or the headmistress or what the teacher wanted. But I think there was generally confusion among a lot of Zimbabweans, particularly our generation, because we're growing up in this. I think there's a lot of intersectionality going on at that phase as well. And I'm saying you could be younger than me, but I'm assuming we're the same generation.
Who knows? We'll figure it out as we keep talking.
For purposes of this podcast, we are assuming that Rugare and I are the same age, or at least within the same generation. We're both millennials.
Yeah, I think I'm the same age as Zimbabwe. The new state.
Right.
Yeah, I think that was declared in my year of birth. You don't have to say it out loud. You can just do
the mystery for this podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh boy, now that is interesting. I mean, what's just been making news at the moment is in a lot of Indigenous communities here, especially in the NT, they've just celebrated 50 years of being able to learn their own languages in school and be able to. So they're bilingual or multilingual, and it can only be of a benefit really to have pride in the language that you were born into, or that that of your heritage and your culture, as well as speaking whatever's the main language in the country that you're living in at the moment. So it's interesting. There's always those crossovers, isn't there?
Yeah.
Especially with colonialism. But anyway.
Yes. And especially for our generation, because our parents, because we're of the same generation,
Yes.
they were really oppressed. They were deprived of opportunity. So that's why my mom and my dad were like, the children must learn English because English will give them global opportunities, period. And it has. I'm here in Australia, it's allowed me to access, a professional career, in one of the greatest countries on earth. So they were right, but at the detriment of for me personally, not acquiring and learning my local language, which a language contains the culture as well. So, and we know that language and culture is so beautiful, so that there's so much wisdom in all cultures and all languages. So the strategy, of course, they did their very best. And of course, there are also consequences from that at the same time.
Absolutely. So with your story, you've arrived in Australia and you're doing your 2 years senior high school.
Yes.
Tell us more.
So I then come to Australia, and even though I speak English, I thought I was coming to Great Britain. I thought it was going to be like Jane Austen books or Charles Dickens. In Zimbabwe we had so much British TV. So the books we read and the books I read personally were so old school, because the library in Mutare had books like, I don't know, you might know them, the Gimlets, the Worrells, like the 19th century. They didn't have these new books. So for me, I'm like, okay, I'm coming. Australia is an offshoot of Great Britain, and Australia is nothing like Great Britain. So it was a culture shock. It wasn't like the books I was reading. It was a whole new world that I'd never interacted with, really. So, and there were things like, for example, dedicated internet. We didn't have dedicated internet in our home. We were still using MS-DOS, and that was at my dad's work. You didn't have that in the home. Washing machines, microwave, dishwashers. We used to wash our own clothes by hand. That was the Saturday, wash the uniform, the car keys by hand. At nighttime, after the meal, you help clear the table and wash the dishes. But there's a thing called a dishwasher. And also in Zimbabwe, it's normal to have people living in the home to help. The helper, the maid, but typically they're a cousin, a cousin with less opportunity coming to the city and they're helping in the home, and they're also being developed for their own opportunities. And in Australia, you do everything yourself. So it was very different in that context. But what I did love was I was made to feel welcome. Absolutely made to feel welcome by the community. The school community just rallied behind me. So that was my first 2 years. And, in Zimbabwe, education is everything. So I was only geared to getting great marks. But at school here, they had things like, the performing, lots of sports. And I was like, I'd love to do the performing arts, but I didn't think that would be a great idea for my year 12, because I'm like, that's going to get in the way of my grades. But one of my friends was like, if that's what you want to do, go and do it. Go and audition now. So I had people at school who were like, go and do that. Go and do that now. Because I didn't have the freedom to do that, because I'm coming in with my mindset of just get good grades,
Right.
read the books, don't do anything else. But my friends really helped me, push me actually to try new things. And I'm forever grateful for that. That really changed my life, because now that's the mindset I have today. Just try. Just try. There are many ways of living life. There's the academic way, there's the performing arts, there's sports. Just try, because there are those opportunities in Australia. If I'm not academic, my life isn't going to fall apart. In Zimbabwe, if you're not academic, your life will fall apart. So I had to readjust to moving from the survival mindset to the abundant mindset. 2 different countries, 2 different contexts. So that was my year 11, year 12. And then when I finished year 12, when it's a time for celebration, for most people finishing high school, for me, it was one of my most anxiety-inducing times. At that time, the Zimbabwean crisis was just getting worse. This is 2002. The University of Zimbabwe is closed. There's no food in the shops. Hyperinflation is starting. So things were just getting worse. You thought they couldn't get any worse, but each year they got worse. So when I left Zimbabwe, I remember like bread was $30. When I was 6 years old, bread was $1.50. And so by the time the 2 years I left Zimbabwe, bread is over $100. So it's just getting worse and worse, So I knew that my mission was to find a way to stay. But how am I going to stay? Because now to go to university, that's going to be like $14,000 to $20,000 a year. Again, mom, no money is coming from mom and dad, zero. Uncle Andrew can't afford $14,000 to $20,000 a year. So I remember my headmistress asking me what I was going to do. And I was like, I really don't know. Then she suggested sharing my story in the school community newsletter, and different families rallied to contribute for me to go to university. And then I also worked my butt off. Now, this is the part that's
I
overwhelming.
just got goosebumps.
It was so overwhelming because people were supporting me, not because I necessarily had the best marks or was the brightest student, but people were supporting me because I was a human being. And
Do you
that
know
was
what?
when I realized that we support people, and not because they've got their perfect grades or they've got that internship or they played the music perfectly. It's because I was just a human being. I deserved to have some dignity. I deserved to have an opportunity because I breathe.
I literally I got goosebumps when you say that, Rugare, because this is not a story we hear a lot of in mainstream. Usually it's negativity, and then you think, oh my gosh, people are not welcome in Australia. But then you hear stories like these, and you're like, actually, the Australian culture, the Australian people that, oh, we're Australians, but the Australian culture is actually one of welcoming. And it's
Yes,
only a few voices that are very loud about not welcoming that then get very loud, and we hear and see them everywhere. But the real story of Australia is about welcoming.
exactly. And
Wow.
sometimes we Australians, we buy into we are not welcoming because that's the loudest voice,
Mm.
And when we listen to
Mm.
the loudest voice, we actually forget who we are. But
Yeah.
even as simple, I'm reading this book, Home to Below. It was
I know.
the refugee
Yes. Oh,
family,
yes.
in
Yes.
country Queensland, you know.
Yes.
You could say
Yes.
country Queensland is very hard living, but the
Yeah.
community rose up for them.
Yes. I remember that.
That's a fabulous story.
Yeah.
An absolute fabulous story. My story, these stories are actually the norm, but the media
Mm.
hijacks the negative.
Yeah.
And so that's why I love what you both are doing, because you are highlighting the goodness of Australia and the goodness that we all have within us. It's the everyday Australian. Like my
Yeah.
life didn't happen in a vacuum, and I'm not self-made. There were hundreds of people who contributed for me. There was the person who would give me $20, $5, to the person who would put $5,000 in my bank account, no questions asked. Like, that's what I really learned about being human, elevating others. There are no conditions to that. There's no criteria to that. So doing good because it's good to do good. Simple.
Because we're all humans, right?
We're all humans. I'm
It's
not a tax
all about.
deductible entity. So nobody was getting a tax receipt. My name is Rugare Gomo. Here's your tax receipt. No,
Any donations above $2?
exactly. That did not exist.
But I bet you have returned their investment though more than tenfold, because they've invested in you, and you said there was no conditions, but because of that experience, you've imposed those conditions. You've worked hard. You've not taken any of that for granted, and you've made you've made a brilliant life for yourself, and congratulations for that. It's pretty amazing.
Thank you,
Mm.
Sandra. And and the thing about it is when you go after a dream, we sometimes wait to be able to fulfill the dream, but it was the dream that changed me. So as I am on this journey, I'm not the person who arrived in Australia. I was shy. This is how I talk. Hello. Did not want to be
I don't
seen or
believe that.
heard. I promise you. You see, I was so nervous, so shy. I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. I grew up that, white is better than black. So I stand out in that way. You're brought up as a black person, you have to work 10 times harder than a white person. So there were all these limiting beliefs, but it was in the journey of, and you said it again, Sandra, like, this whole podcast is something greater than yourself. And that was what it was like coming to Australia, pursuing a better future. It was something greater than myself. But that changed me. I discovered my voice. So as these people are contributing to me, I asked myself, how can I contribute back to them? But that wasn't a question that was available for me until I started pursuing my dream, So I started doing things like being part of Amnesty International. I started Zimbabwe Aware at university, which was like petitioning your federal MP, to lobby and put pressure on the Zimbabwean government to stop killing people. Things like that. I would never have done anything like that, So it was a whole community. It's not just one thing. It was pursuing the dream, people investing in me thinking about how to invest back in people that had me grow and find my voice, find my rhythm in life. And it was very hard. The first, 4 years at university, I should say, were very hard because then I'd have to raise, $14,000 to $20,000 every year. That's not including books. That's not including accommodation. That's not including anything. That's just school fees. And it was such a huge effort to do that every year. And every single time asking for help, at that time in my life, it would bring up shame. It would bring up things like, am I worthy to be helped? It would bring up anxiety. So not only am I doing an arts law degree, which requires a lot of study, presence, I'm also trying to raise all this money to go to university, And I know this is not unique to me. Many people are doing things like that as well, So I really, really acknowledge that. But that was the making of me. So I call my university years my first capital raising experience. That's when I really learned how to be a fundraiser, a person who can raise capital for a particular goal and objective, and also connect with the stakeholders. So I literally looked at my donors as my stakeholders and people who to be respected, people to be inputted back into by sharing my story with them and how I was progressing in life. So that was my
And
university years.
you've gone through so much in your life, and you've written a book, Dreams.
Yes.
Can you tell us how this came about and share any insights you learned, during writing, the production process, and why was this important to you?
It was critical. There's nothing more important than this book.
Tell
Why?
us more.
I'm a Black, gay, African migrant,
Zimbabwean?
Zimbabwean, Australian. I exist. I'm not in the shadows. We exist, and we exist in large numbers. But I'm so grateful that I get to feel safe and also feel empowered. Maybe I don't know whether I'm safe, but I'm empowered to say that. And I will say that in any case. And so voices like mine are not readily available in the world. And so for me, I just want a person like me, whether it's, the boy or girl in Nigeria, the boy or girl in Somalia, the boy or girl in Qatar, to know that our voices matter, we exist, and we can do hard things. It was hard coming out.